as folks are coming in, welcome. If you would like to turn your video on, please feel free to. This will be somewhat of an interactive session, and both Hannah and I are people who really appreciate and enjoy having audience interaction and feedback. So please feel free to do that and don't feel like you need to just stay quiet in your little box. So welcome to Digital Security 101 for reproductive justice organizers. I am Olivia Lawrence-Wileman. I'm a bald, queer, white person sitting in this beautiful sun porch in Boston, Massachusetts. I work at Political Research Associates. We're a social justice think tank devoted to supporting movements that are building a more just and inclusive democratic society. We track, monitor, and analyze the right wing in order to support social justice movements in developing their strategies and tactics, and to help folks understand what it is that they're up against. In my work at PRA, I do research and project management, particularly around data in the service of liberatory political work. And certainly as an organization that tracks, monitors, and publishes on the right wing, we're constantly thinking about our digital security, but I personally am not in any way a professional in the digital security world. Most of what I know has been taught to me by wonderful comrades, friends, and mentors, and also self-taught through a lot of the resources that we're going to be able to share with you all in a nice document towards the end. And I think of digital security work as a form of mutual aid and community care. And so I'm really excited to share some of the things that I've learned with you all.
Yay. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a short-haired, white, queer person in like an attic room wearing a black shirt. And I'm calling in from Baltimore, Maryland on unceded Piscataway land. I work at the National Network of Abortion Funds, where I support internal databases and like collect data and tell stories about the power of abortion funds. But I also, similar to Olivia, am not a digital security expert. I'm just here because I was doxxed in college as part of the Palestine Solidarity Movement and had to learn some digital security basics like real quick to support myself and the folks that I was organizing with. Outside of work, I organize a community safety team in my Jewish community with an abolitionist and police alternatives framework and run digital security trainings like this for friends and organizers. I believe that safety comes through solidarity, and today we are going to get to learn some skills together about how to have each other's back when it comes to digital security. I'm excited that you're all here. Thanks for coming. So we are going to start. I just wanted to start by offering like a short grounding. It is really easy for digital security conversations to feel very overwhelming and impossible, and like there's just like nothing that you can do to like keep yourself safe. And that's not true. And we're just like not going to do that today. We do not have time or like energy or vibes for that. So I instead want to just like invite you to settle in to a posture that feels grounding for you. You can feel your butt, your thighs connected to your seat. Your back is strong, feeling your people behind you, and your front is soft and open to learning new things and moving into the unknown together. If you'd like, you can come off of mute to do some breaths together. We're just gonna like breathe in, hold it for the count of 3, and breathe out with some sound. So you're welcome to come off mute or stay on it. Let's do 3 breaths together, starting now. I'm gonna inhale through my nose. Hold it. And exhale with sound. Let's do 2 more. Breathe in. Hold it. And exhale with some more sound. Get it out. Let's do 1 more. Breathe in. Hold it at the top. And breathe out. Awesome. You can take a look around and wave at the other names on the screen. to the side, above you, below you. Digital security is all about learning things in collective to keep ourselves and our community safer. And this is our crew today. And I'm so glad you all could come.
Thanks, Hannah, for that really lovely grounding. So what are we going to do today together? The first thing that we're going to talk about is really framing how we think about digital security and best practices for how to even conceptualize this whole big world of things. The next thing that we're going to do is walk through a risk assessment, talk about what that is, how to use it, how that can help inform our digital security work. And then we're going to dive into kind of three big chunks that really govern your digital world and life. The first will be thinking through how we can make our communication safer. The next piece will be about how we can conduct safer research. And then the last piece will be about how we can be safer online more generally. And then we're going to go into a Q&A session, co-working, if you want to put some of these things into practice while we're here as resources to be able to answer any questions. That's what the last section will be about. And so with that, I will turn it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Olivia. Okay, so Olivia and I talked about like just where we are coming from with digital security, and these were some of the things that we came up with, which basically is that security is a practice and a way of thinking. It's basically just turning on a filter in your brain that helps you recognize anytime you're sharing information about yourself and just double checks with you and goes like, hey, is this something I want to be sharing in this way? It's a combination of understanding how your information is shared online and with whom, and then making a choice based on that about how you want to engage. It really comes down to consent. It can be incredibly powerful to be vocal and public about our politics and activities online, but it's about knowing what information we're actually sharing when we post a picture on Facebook or search something in Google. Consent comes in so that we just like know what we're sharing and aren't sharing things accidentally that we didn't say yes to. There are all kinds of tools and practices out there that can help you increase your security online. And they usually fall along this spectrum between things that are like super secure and then things that are like actually easy to use every day. And unfortunately, like they're split on that. And it's because things that are super secure are like harder to use or cost money. And that's because if something online is free, like Facebook or Gmail, it's not actually free, like you and your data are the product. But it's like I have to use Facebook and Gmail every single day, and they're part of my everyday life. The piece of digital security that we're trying to share today is that you get to have a choice about how to engage and where along the spectrum you fall based on your risk levels, and know that there are tools that you can use when you want to engage in riskier activities. It's also important to note that digital security is inherently a collective activity. Like we are only as safe as the least secure person in our network. So even if everybody in a group is on a super secure encrypted message thread in an underground bunker, like if one person is in the group chat and loses their phone and their unlock code is 0000, then I could find that phone, unlock it, and see everything in the group chat and know who is all in the group chat and compromise the security. So digital security is not just for you, it's also our responsibility as like good comrades to learn the basics so that we can do our part to protect folks in our communities who are the most vulnerable. And there's just like different things that happen in different ways. Like if I'm trying to call my grandma, I'm choosing like the easy ones. And if I'm planning like a high security direct action, I'm choosing the other side. So you just get to choose.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. So like Hannah mentioned towards the beginning, diving into this topic can be really overwhelming. And we're not going to do that today. We're going to take advantage of some tools, and risk assessment is one of them that can really help us to begin to combat the overwhelm and to put sort of like specificity to the things that we're talking about. And risk assessment is a tool that helps us begin to identify what it is specifically that we might want to pay attention to. You can think of security as kind of like an onion. It's all about layers. And if you picture an attacker as someone who's like trying to like peel the onion, it's pretty easy to peel off one layer of skin. And it is definitely possible to peel through the whole thing, but at some point, most people, especially trolls, will find themselves crying from peeling the onion and give up. So here are a list of questions. These are from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, an awesome organization. We include links to some of their resources in a resource packet we'll share with you all. The first question that we can ask is, what is it that you want to protect? This could include personal information, anything from like name, birth date, address, that kind of information, to personal information like communities that you're a part of, or other parts of your identity. It could be things like files that are either local or that are moving. There are lots of different things that can be in this what category. The next question that we want to ask is, who do you want to protect it from? Are you trying to protect it from trolls, the police, corporations, right? Each of those are different kinds of actors and are going to require different levels of security. The next question that we want to ask is, how likely is it that you're going to need to protect that information? We also ask, how bad are the consequences if you fail to be able to protect it? And then this last question is about, how much trouble are you willing to go to in order to prevent that from happening? And this goes back to the spectrum that Hannah was talking about, of like easy to use to very secure. We're all going to fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum on different potential scenarios. So these are great questions to ask. And then we've got another tool here, and this is a tool that helps us prioritize. Once we start to identify threats using a risk assessment, using some of those questions before, we're going to start to want to think about like, how do we prioritize addressing those? Threat modeling is a tool that people in the security software world use to identify potential risk areas and figure out how to either mitigate those or accept the risks. And we're going to want to focus in on this quadrant here, things that are both more likely to happen and also things that would have more disastrous consequences were they to occur. So we're going to walk through a couple of scenarios that Hannah and I brainstormed, and then we'll have an opportunity for you all to add scenarios if you would like. And I can't see what just showed up in the chat. So if you want to take a look at that, Hannah, that'd be awesome. So this first scenario is, say your email and password are compromised in a data breach. That's actually a very, very likely thing to happen. Data breaches happen all the time. But if you're doing things like not reusing passwords across websites, it's probably not that big of a deal. Your information's compromised, you go and change that one specific password. If you're reusing passwords across all platforms, it becomes much more of, there's potentially a bigger impact, but you can see by doing a thing like using unique passwords for each site, it brings the risks down from more of the disastrous quadrant into the it'll be okay. Here's another scenario, which is that, say you are coordinating hotline volunteer shifts for your local clinic, and accidentally the permissions on that spreadsheet are set to like anyone with the link is able to either view or edit that document, and the link somehow becomes public. If that were to happen, that would potentially be disastrous, right? It has people's full names, phone numbers on it. But if we just think about like a couple things that we can do to move this scenario in towards the direction of it'll be okay and towards the direction of less likely, that could be things like making sure the permissions are, only shared with the right people, maybe only using people's first names on the document. Things like that very quickly moves the scenario out of that kind of quadrant that we're really interested in focusing on. Here's another scenario. Say there's like some particularly aggressive protesters outside your clinic. And as like a volunteer is leaving, somebody grabs their phone. If the phone is password protected, probably going to be fine. If it's not password protected and there's a lot of confidential information on there, that maybe is more of a challenging situation. At this point, I would love to open it up if other folks have scenarios that they're brainstorming to feel free to either throw them into the chat, in which case maybe Hannah could read out loud because I'm screen sharing, or feel free to come off mute and offer up a situation.
So this is something that actually happened at our org. So I work for a white-led org that's in community with RJ organizations, just as like as a primer. We do a lot more legislative work than on the ground organizing at this point, but we brought someone to the State House to testify against an abortion ban last year. And the personal like emails of one of our testifiers who was a teacher who spoke against the abortion ban, somehow that email got leaked. We know the only people who had that email address was our internal staff and the staff members of like senators at the State House. So there are only two places where that could have gone because we had to use that email to sign up for that. But this like middle school teacher got a bunch of trolls in her email inbox, and like her school district had to like shut down her account. So it's like when we know where the like threat came from, like we dealt with it internally, but like we still have to bring testifiers to the State House. We still have to like use the system of registering to speak. And so that risk still exists for our people. And like the whole thing is public, but like, so they'll have like the public access channel shows people's names and faces as they're testifying. Like we had an awareness of how public it would be, but what our testifier didn't consent to was having their email just like all out loose like that. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. That sounds like a situation that very much merits going on a grid like this. And I would love maybe in the question and answer section, like brainstorm as a group, like maybe hear what you all ended up doing, or like if you're looking for support around how to move forward with something like that. I think that would be a really wonderful thing for us all to brainstorm together. Thank you for sharing that, Courtney. Is there anybody else who?
I was just going to ask Courtney, like, where on the grid would you put that if you were going to put it on the grid?
I mean, I didn't think it was likely till it happened.
Yeah.
I don't think it didn't rise all the way to the top of disastrous, but it did cause harm. So I'll put it in the middle as like harmful. And I guess it's like in the lower third of the blue quadrant here.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds right. But definitely part of the part that we work on.
Yeah. Is there anyone else who has a scenario they'd like to share, either something that happened or something that you think could happen or that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, I can go just because like this literally just happened this morning at the clinic. I mean, it happens all the time, but just like this one instance is fresh on my mind. So we have a relatively new clinic escort that just started last month, I think. And in our trainings, we tell people it's possible that protesters will take a picture of you, your car, your license plate, the contents of your car if it's not very well tinted, and if they can get close enough to it. So we tell them that ahead of time just so that they're prepared. but that actually did happen today. And the protester, I like watch them on Facebook while we are there, just to see what they're posting, what they're saying. And a protester took a picture of this new escort's car and all of her bumper stickers and her license plate. He posted it on Facebook. His profile page is public. That's how I can see all this. And like, so she was, I guess, mentally prepared because we had told her it could happen, but like I could tell that she was really like shaken up that this personal information of hers was just now out there. And like I just felt really bad because like I don't know what to say to her in that situation. Like we usually tell people like, oh, don't worry, it's just like they're not actually going to do anything with this information. It's literally just an intimidation thing. But yeah, so I don't know. That's another there's a scenario. And like as far as the graph, I mean for me, I know it's likely that it could happen. And then I think it's mostly it'll be okay, other than just like the emotional response to, you just feel kind of gross, you like something was taken, a picture was taken without your consent, put on the internet without your consent, and it's just like something we have to deal with.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Marcelli. And also one thing that I just would like to note at this point is that emotional impacts are real impacts, and maybe like that person will be like isn't going to experience any kind of physical danger, and also and Hannah will talk about this a little bit more later on, like those emotional impacts are real impacts, and something that we want to consider when we're thinking through digital security, both individually and collectively. I think that it would probably be good to move on at this point, so take it away.
Thanks, Olivia. Okay, so the next, we're entering like the part of our agenda where we kind of break down the strategies into 3 buckets. And the first bucket that we're going to talk about is safer communication. And so for like one of the examples that we just talked about in the disastrous and likely quadrant, there's one example of how we could like do coordination more safely. And that was the one about the hotline volunteer spreadsheet. Of course, like the first thing you could do, like Olivia talked about, was like check your freaking settings and like make sure that you're being careful about how you circulate links and people's email addresses and phone numbers and information. But it also really depends on like who you're trying to keep information safe from. And sometimes it's like trolls or antis or white nationalists. But sometimes it's like the state, and that there are times in which you don't want any evidence of what you were talking about or like looking up to be present. And so that's when you use encryption. And people have probably heard about encryption, like hacker, whatever. But basically it just means when you want to protect the content of your messages from anyone but the receiver. So if you're planning a direct action on Google Docs, a troll can't read it if you have your settings locked down, but the police can subpoena Google and just get records of your work and everything that you were planning and talking about. But if you were sending encrypted messages about your action planning, through a company like Signal, they never even have records of the content of your messages, and all they see is the encrypted text. So they do know who you are and who you're texting, but it's encrypted, and so they can't see the content of it. So this graphic just tries to like break down how encryption works a little bit, but the easiest way to think about it is just that you can kind of like lock messages so that no one else can read it. So in this example, Bob is writing an email to Alice, and upon sending it, encrypts the email with a code that only Alice can unlock. The server receives Bob's email and sends it to the right Alice, but can only see the encrypted gobbledygook of the email body because it doesn't have Alice's key to unlock the message. And when Alice gets the email, she can unencrypt it using her private unlock key. So if the feds are trying to see email communications between Bob and Alice and subpoenas the email company, the company doesn't even have the email content, and they never had it because it was always encrypted. But one thing to note is that they can prove that Bob sent Alice an email. So it's not anonymous, it's just encrypted. And you might think that we should only use encryption for like super secret things when you really need to, but there's also a really good argument to be made for just normalizing encryption as part of our everyday activities, both because that helps us practice so that when we do need to use encryption, we are good at it or we're better at it than just our first time. But also it's like kind of some herd immunity. Like if you're looking at all of the messages being sent from one neighborhood and there's one house that keeps sending encrypted messages, like that's hella suspicious. But if everybody's using encryption, it kind of makes using encryption like less suspicious and makes privacy more of a right that everybody gets to have all the time. So some tools that you can use either for the everyday life encryption or just when you need a little extra privacy are messaging platforms like Signal. I have heard people that also like Telegram, but I've never used it, so I can't totally vouch for it. And folks might have also heard that WhatsApp is also encrypted, but it's owned by Facebook, so I don't really trust it. I don't know, you can. For email, I use a platform called Proton Mail pretty regularly. It's free email addresses, and I think you can send up to like 100 emails a day on the free version. And if you're looking for co-working tools that are not Google Suite, you can use things like a Rise Up Pad, which is like a collaborative document notes, and also something called CryptPad, which has a whole suite of like slides and spreadsheets and all kinds of stuff like that. So these are also all in the resources doc that we can share at the end of this.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm going to talk about safer research, and research is really important. Knowledge is awesome. There are a lot of reasons why we might want to know things, looking up information to take care of ourselves or a loved one, or to do what at the place I work, PRA, we call opposition research, which is gathering information on the people who, in this case, are probably working to take away access to healthcare, et cetera. And so there are a bunch of things that we can do to protect ourselves while doing research, and a bunch of reasons we might want to. So I'm going to talk through a couple scenarios first. Say you want to look up how to perform a self-managed abortion and how to get access to those materials. Why would security be important in this case? There are lots of reasons. Some people who end their own pregnancies are interrogated, arrested, charged by law enforcement for criminal activity, according to NNAF, which is where Hannah works. There are 5 states currently with laws that make self-managing an abortion a crime. At least 21 people and possibly more have been arrested and prosecuted for ending their own pregnancy or for helping someone else end a pregnancy since 2000. And so in a context where abortion care is culturally stigmatized and the legal landscape is super complex and changing, access to secure and private information is pretty crucial. Another potential scenario that you might encounter is, say you want to look up information on your local crisis pregnancy center. In this case, the security question for me comes up that you might not want your personal information, so like your Gmail, your Facebook, other accounts that you're signed into, connected to looking up the CPC. That could lead to things like targeted advertising, which is pretty creepy and unpleasant at best. If you've ever like searched for some like random or like obscure medical condition that you just found out about, like Googled it, and then the next day your Facebook has like ads for like therapies for that, or to like enroll in a clinical trial for something for that, like that's an example of targeted advertising in the way that that kind of information is shared. Also, certain sites may log the IP addresses of their visitors, which is basically like functionally sharing your physical address location information. Really, it's the information of the location of your computer, your device, but it's very connected also to physical location, in this case with the Crisis Pregnancy Center. So those are like things that we don't want to do. And so here are a couple tools that we can use to like help provide more security for this. The first is Tor browser. Tor is a web browser, just like Safari, Chrome, Firefox. If anyone's still using Internet Explorer, all of those are also web browsers. Tor is pretty cool and special in that it acts both as a VPN, which I'll talk about in a minute, and it also can provide a pretty high degree of anonymity. It can also be very slow. I personally don't use it in my day-to-day browsing because of how slow it is, but there are times when I open up Tor because it's useful to use for specific purposes. And each time you open it, you want to make sure that cookies and browsing history are cleared. I believe those are default settings, but it's always useful to look up. And Tor is something that can really help keep a separation between you and whatever information it is that you're researching. Highly recommend checking it out. Another tool here is a VPN that stands for Virtual Private Network. Many people, particularly now that a lot of us are working remotely, you may actually use a VPN for work to help you connect to your organization's server. And often there are like files and stuff stored there. VPNs are also a tool that can like help you connect to the internet in a more, in a way that like conceals to a certain extent your location information. Briefly, it can just work to obscure your particular IP address, the location of your computer or device, and provide a bit of a layer of security between you and whatever it is that you're looking at on the internet. It's important to note they don't provide anonymity and shouldn't be treated as such. You'll find stuff online talking about how they do. Based on my understanding, that is false. And in the resources packet, we have a link to like how to think through different VPNs and select one that's right for you. So there are a couple other things. If you want to use a browser like Chrome or Firefox, generally, and like to take a step back, like Firefox generally tends to be more privacy friendly than Chrome, and then like a lot of other browsers, except Tor. But Chrome also has some of its advantages. In my day-to-day browsing, I use both Chrome and Firefox. Chrome lets you create like different people or personas, and they don't need to be connected to a Gmail account, and they keep those like search history, accounts you're signed into, et cetera, separate. And so like personally, I have a Chrome persona for all my work-related activities that are like connected to me as Olivia. And then I have a different Chrome persona for all my work-related opposition research. That's like looking into various sectors of the right wing. And that lets me keep my like personal email separate from me, like looking up the Proud Boys and things like that. And then I use Firefox for all my personal browsing, and I set up different containers. And there's a plugin you can have, we have it linked in the resources packet, but it lets you like separate out social media from your email, from financial information, et cetera. And to help create a little bit of a separation between those various activities. So these are all definitely things to consider and can be really useful depending on what it is that you want to do.
Thanks, Olivia. Okay, so this next section is about how to be safer online in general. And we've talked a little bit about doxing already in this presentation, but I want to make sure that we have like a common definition of it. Does anybody want to start us off with like what doxing is and more people can add to it?
Just like whenever your personal information is made public.
Yeah, that's
like
great.
A phone number or address or something.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone want to add anything? Yeah, we can start with that. Yeah, and other pieces to note about doxing, it is, as of right now, totally legal. And it's also a tactic that both like the right and the left uses, like organizers and people who are vocal about white supremacy, feminism, trans liberation, abortion online are doxed by people who want to intimidate us into silence, but also leftists dox Nazis and try to get them fired for their jobs. So it's just a tactic. And I don't know, people think different ways about how it like if it's good or bad, or doxing, good, bad. But also the other thing to note about doxing is that it's really not that hard. Like there is a horrifying amount of information available online for the average person. We use like our phone numbers for CVS cards, and then that company just sells data to another company, like back and forth with each other all day long. And this data collects in what are called data brokers, which are online clearinghouses of data on people with like your name and addresses and phone numbers and your relatives and your email addresses. And usually during a presentation, I would like pull this up to show you, but there isn't really an ethical way of like, I'm not trying to like dox anybody right now. So, but we can explore it together at the end during co-working time. Yeah, and that your online profiles are more likely than not connected to each other. Either like you use the same email address to sign into them, or they all have like your same name on them. So if I was trying to dox you and I had one piece of information about you, like your full name or your email, I could use that to check multiple social media sites to learn more pieces of information about you and connect your accounts to each other to get a fuller picture of who you are. Maybe you're not as open about your politics on Facebook as you are on Twitter, but if you use the same profile picture on both of your accounts, I could reverse image search your profile picture and see all of the accounts that you use that on. And so if you were posting stuff on Twitter that I didn't like, I could harass you on Facebook and get the right version of, and get the right you. And yeah, it's not that hard to dox someone who hasn't taken any steps towards securing themselves, and you don't have to be a hacker. And actually, I feel like a lot of women and trans folks have learned these skills already that are just kind of like devalued in the world. But it's like the exact same skill set to dox someone as it is if you're like looking up your friend's Tinder date, or like someone who's been creepy, or like Facebook stalking people that like you kind of know. We already know how to do this, and it's time to employ these skills to protect ourselves and our community. So things that we can do to protect ourselves, because there are a lot of things that we can do to make it harder for people to dox us. As Olivia was talking about, it is really difficult to remove yourself from the internet completely in this day and age, but you can make it a lot harder for trolls to do it, and then they just give up and find somebody else. So that's pretty cool, and it's cool to learn what we can do to protect ourselves. So some of the things are trying to dox yourself or swapping with a friend to see what's out there. You can Google yourself or look for yourself in data brokers like White Pages or addresses.com. We have a whole list that we can share later. And you can then opt out of your information being found on data brokers. It takes a long time, but it is worth doing and highly recommend doing it. You can lock down your privacy settings on social media accounts. We have some activities that help walk you through this. Social media sites like Facebook are hella annoying because they're changing their settings like all the time. So sometimes it's hard to like keep up to date on it, and it's good to check in on your settings regularly. And the last one is just reviewing your social media accounts to be intentional about what you're sharing there and what people could connect your accounts with. And bringing it back to consent, right? Like it's super powerful to be vocally anti-fascist on the internet, but you want to know what the risks are and how to reduce them so that people can't connect your Twitter handle to your home address or to your family members' names. You could think about things like changing your account name to not be your full legal name, or swapping out the email address that the account was tied to for a secondary email address that would be okay if it was leaked on a forum somewhere. And we will have some co-working time later today and can hopefully do some of this and get started with that.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm gonna talk us through a like passwords 101 piece, which is a little bit more of a in-depth piece about being safe online. And so passwords are a really great and super important line of defense. Almost all of our accounts require either an email or username, sometimes both, and a password combo. And email and usernames can often be public or public facing. So the password is going to be a key part of the security there. And it's really important to think through this a little bit, because if somebody has your email password, they can reset often your other passwords like banking, other really important accounts. And also, if somebody has a password for an account that's not super important to you, it often still can be a gateway into accessing your other passwords. So unfortunately, there are always going to be ways around secure passwords. But like we said before, every layer that you build up in your security practice counts. This comic is from XKCD. It's a useful tool to talk about password strength. If you look at the quote at the bottom, they say that through 20 years of effort, we have successfully trained everyone to use passwords that are hard for humans to remember, but easy for computers to guess. So if we walk through the examples they have here in the upper left-hand quadrant, we have a word that looks like it was maybe a random word that was chosen by this person, and then they substituted common like characters or numbers for some of the letters, and then maybe added a couple random characters on the end. This comes out to a password that's like probably challenging to remember, even if you type it multiple times. I have not fact checked the math on this. I haven't like plugged this particular password into any kind of a reputable password security. I'm blanking on the word, but like to test how secure it is. But certainly according to the comic, they say it would take 3 days at 1,000 guesses per second, which is something that computers can do. And so they categorize that as easy to guess, but pretty hard to remember. If we look at the second example here in this comic, you have 4 random dictionary words that are selected. It looks like there's a space in between each of them. And they have rated that at, said that it would take 550 years at the same rate of guesses per second. And so have categorized that as hard, but certainly much easier to remember. So there, the second example here that we see is often called a passphrase, which is where you take some random words, but that are like dictionary words, and string them together. There's a cool resource called useapassphrase.com. We've included it in the resources that you can use to like play around with this. So that's a little bit on passwords. And thinking through passwords, a few things to remember is you want to go for length over complexity. In the comic previously, I think the first password was something like 11 or 12 characters. The other one was much longer. I'm not sure how many, but length is really, really important here. The other piece is you don't want to use like your name, birthday, pets, any kind of like words that are related to you personally somehow. Those are going to be much easier to guess. The last piece, and this is pretty crucial, is you don't want to be reusing passwords across platforms. That is going to bring me to this next piece about password managers. I'm seeing a head nodding, which means maybe you already use one, which would be awesome. Oh, maybe you've heard about it. Maybe someone has told you you should. Great. Well, I am actually about to do that same thing. But password managers are tools that store all your different login information. So they're a really great way to easily make it so that you can use a unique and much more complex password actually than just like 4 random words together across different websites, and you don't have to remember them. I've been using one for several years. I think I have like 500 passwords stored. There's absolutely no way that I would be able to remember those. And you only have to remember your single password to log into the password manager. Often it's called a master password. And so a question that comes up when we're talking about password managers is like, well, but isn't having all of my passwords in one place a security risk? And the answer is yes, it is. But also having a couple, like 1 or up to 2 or 3 passwords that are like actually probably pretty easy for a computer to guess, that you're using across multiple sites is a huge security risk, and frankly, a much bigger one than using a password manager. And so if you go with a reputable password manager, and there are a couple we're gonna throw in here. I think this is 1Password. This is Dashlane. This is LastPass, which is what I use. Bitwarden, Splash ID, which is what Hannah uses. If you go with a reputable password manager and set a complex master password and also use two-factor authentication, it's a much lower security risk than not using one. That being said, there can be a pretty big learning curve at first to learning how to use a password manager and learning whatever particular password manager you pick. If you're somebody who picks up new technology pretty quickly, I highly, highly would recommend that you invest the time and energy in learning how to use one. But if something like that feels like a big barrier to you, it might actually not be worth it to you. So that's something that's worth considering and thinking about. And again, there are lots of different password managers out there. I use LastPass, Hannah uses Splash ID. There are some links in the resources document that can help you decide which one might be a good one for you.
We did it. We made it through all the content. Okay, first off, I apologize. We just threw like a lot of information at you guys. So I am really glad that you're here. I want to encourage everybody to take a little baby stretch break. I'm gonna shake it off, hydrate, water your insides. And we are now at the time, we have like 20 minutes left, 25 minutes left, to just kind of like talk, hang out, talk through some digital security things, and do some co-working. Olivia and I made this cute resources packet for y'all that kind of breaks down some of the links and references that we talked about. And you're welcome to take 25 minutes and like start checking off like some of the boxes, or we can talk about some of the digital security questions that y'all have or things that you're dealing with in your lives. What's up?
Thank you. This has been super informative. I have been wondering, as I've been doing coalition work to shut down the Irwin Detention Center here in Georgia, and we are collecting folks' data when they sign up for different events, and given that everything's online, I'm wondering about a two prongs. I'm wondering about how we can be safer, in quotation marks, about housing people's information that we collect for different events. And I'm also wondering about different platforms that might be safer for folks to use. I'm thinking about an event that I went to recently that got bombed. That's bad choice of words, but it was on Zoom, but someone was like masturbating, like it was like a pop-up. And it went on for like a good 5 minutes as this former detainee was talking about her horrible experience in a detention center. So like it was pretty jarring for people, you know? And so I'm wondering about, are there different platforms that give a little bit more security? And I guess I'm wondering, and I know the answer is like there's no complete safety, but I'm wondering if there are safer platforms to use as we're mostly gathering online with each other.
Do you want to take that one, Hannah? Or
Yeah, those are two really good questions. I'm just going to rephrase to make sure I got them. The first one is like, how can we be more responsibly collecting people's information of folks that we're organizing with to keep it safe? And the second one is like strategies to prevent Zoom bombing or like more secure platforms for meeting on. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
Dope. Okay. The first one, I would say it could be worth doing, like walking through some of the risk assessment questions that we went through at the beginning, like with your team. I was just doing this with a group called Never Again Action that is like Jewish folks organizing against like the fucked up immigration shit that we are living in. And it was pretty hard because it's like, okay, like we collect all these email addresses, like they're using like Action Network or like whatever petition platforms, like Act Blue for donations, like stuff to make it really easy for folks to get involved. But then it's also like scary for like, okay, what if these big companies are like compromised in some of these.
Exactly.
And at some point, they're just like, isn't really like a good answer or system. And I think it goes back also to like the threat model. Like, if you are nervous about trolls and right wingers gaining access to your lists of folks that you're housing in corporate things like Action Network or whatever, make sure that your logins to your accounts on that are like really locked down and you know exactly who has the logins to them. You're using two-factor authentication and you're just being careful about who has access to entering. But the average troll like won't be able to access that. If you're worried about the government as a threat actor, that's the part where it's like, we kind of like don't know. Like we're in such a weird political moment, and basically like the state just makes up like when they want to prosecute people and when they don't want to prosecute people. And so it's really difficult to make like an educated decision on it. But that feels like such a clear, good example of like when on the spectrum of like super secure versus like actually accessible to be able to organize with people, that we
Right.
want to be more on the accessible because it's like important to be getting the word out and doing organizing around it.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I would also add on to what Hannah was just saying that there are probably going to be times where being on the more accessible end is actually what makes the most sense. And there are going to be other times, probably mostly around action planning, where you actually like want to lock that down, make sure that it's only trusted folks who are in the signal loop, as opposed to like just adding all the phone numbers, you know, that people have submitted, those kinds of things. And it's really okay for there to be kind of a plethora of tools that you use for different situations. And like goes back to doing that, going through those questions and doing a risk assessment to be able to select in any given situation what is the useful way to go about it.
Yeah. In terms of the answer to your Zoom question, that again has to do with whether it is like a public event. Like it sounds like this was like more like a speak out in which you wanted the link circulated so that lots of people would come. In that case, I think that, like you mentioned, there isn't really a good way to prevent a Zoom bomber from entering the like the video call. At the National Network of Abortion Funds, if we're doing like internal network only calls, we ask people to register first, and then we'll have like a waiting room in the Zoom call. And anytime we see somebody's name pop up, we'll cross-reference and only let them in if they registered or like if we know them. But if registration like isn't really feasible, having one or two people who are on it for tech support for the call is really, really important, so that you have somebody who's like not the speaker, whose job it is to, when they see somebody causing some nonsense, like muting them and kicking them out immediately. And that is just also a way to like minimize and like reduce the harm that is being caused by that interruption. If you're looking for like action planning encrypted video calls that aren't Zoom, there's really only one that I've had good experiences with, which is called Jitsi. And even then it gets sketchy if it's like above like 4 people in the call. So you can try it out, but yeah.
How do you spell that?
Jitsi. I'll write it in the chat, Jitsi. And it's
Thank you.
also linked in the resources doc.
Thank
One
you.
other thing potentially worth considering, again, depending on the size of the event and the kind of interaction that you're looking for, is going with a Zoom webinar and making it so that anyone who's going to speak is like promoted to panelist. And that will make it so that, you know, nobody who's uninvited would be able to share video, and you're also able to disable the chat if that is necessary. And as well as kicking people out, like having a dedicated tech person, like Hannah was saying, to kick somebody out.
And last question along the lines of that, a Zoom webinar, only the folks that are deemed panelists or presenters can speak?
Yeah, so my understanding of the way that it works is that the host, you can invite people by their email addresses, and then they get a unique kind of login from that email address. And then those are the only people that have video and can speak. And when you're the moderator of something like that, if you like own the meeting, you can see a list of participants and you can promote somebody to a panelist, and you may also be able to demote somebody from panelist to attendee, but I'm not sure about that particular piece.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for all the work you're doing, Sophia. I really appreciate that campaign. It's really dope. And definitely reach out if you have like more digital security questions or want to like troubleshoot stuff. Like, would love to work.
Yeah, definitely will. It's been a question that's come up a lot over the last couple of weeks. It's a lot of coalition partners that have been working together, and we've been thinking deeply about what does it look like to keep people's information as safe as possible, especially given the topic of the work that we're doing. And it's been hard. And again, there's no like guaranteed safety in any of the things that we're doing, but we're just trying to get better at making it a little bit safer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also, especially working with detainees or formerly detained folks or undocumented folks, never asking for people's, I'm sure you already know this, but just for everybody, just bears repeating, like never asking for anybody to identify their documentation status on a Google spreadsheet or in a form or anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Don't need to know. Nobody needs to know. Cool. I also want to uplift a question or a comment that Mariseli posted in the chat, which was that Nairon, Missouri was Zoom bombed once by a person who made their screen name the name of a well-known activist so that we would let them in, which is awful and hella tricky. And also, that's what I would do if I was trying to like enter a call, you know? And so one way that you can like think through things and try to like build safety into it is when you're planning an event, like really putting yourself in the shoes of like, okay, if I was trying to like come into this event and disrupt, like how would I do it? And like really trying to like write it out and then looking back at it and seeing like, okay, how can we really try to like prevent this at every angle?
I want to respond to Courtney's question in the chat. And Courtney asked how you teach digital security to a team, particularly when your staff or team has been operating in a particular way for a long time. And this is something that I'm sure a lot of us will be able to relate to. And the first thing that I would do is, again, sit down and walk through some of those questions and maybe plot the things that you're concerned about on that axis. And then maybe pick like, what are the top 1, 2, or 3 things that feel the most important to you, and find somebody who's going to be like the champion of that for your team, and we'll teach people and we'll serve as a resource to ask people, or for when people have questions about how that thing works. The other thing, in my personal experience, that is really useful is when leadership is fully on board. And if leadership says like, this is how we're doing things, and that's something that becomes an expectation either organization-wide or team-wide. I mean, there's a lot to be said for like change from the bottom within organizations. And I also think that sometimes it's really helpful when leadership is like, all right, this is how things are happening.
Courtney, I'm also going to paste 2 links into the chat, which are 2 organizations that do like digital security support for nonprofits. The first one is called Tech Impact, which I don't know, like isn't like explicitly in like the Repro world, but sometimes has like some free courses on like digital security and also just like tech computer infrastructure for nonprofits. And yeah, they have been really, really helpful in the past. And also this rad organization called Digital Defense Fund, if folks know them, they work explicitly with abortion funds, abortion providers to help with digital security stuff. And they are pretty well funded and so can like likely offer some pro bono support stuff.
I would also add onto that Equality Labs, which I think we may have included them in the resources packet. They're an awesome South Asian-led organization that does both like digital security audits for nonprofits, thinking through what changes they might want to make as an organization. And also I believe they do rapid response when there's doxing.
Do people have more questions, or has this like brought anything up for you where you felt like, oh shit, that's the first thing I'm gonna get on? Password manager, let's go.
I think Jordan,
Oh, sorry.
well, okay, I was gonna say Jordan also asked about if we would suggest paying for LastPass. I also use the free version and have been using it for a couple of years, and have been able, like, I think within the last year they made the mobile app accessible to their free, to like the non-paid subscribers, and you're able to share each password with up to one person, which for me personally has met my needs, but I think it would like depend on what your personal needs are, if there are other folks you want to share it with, or there are other capabilities that you want that aren't in the free version. But I don't think it's like more secure if you pay for it.
Courtney, were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was just going to say that like our first job is to do that risk assessment as we go into session. And I feel like it's going to be maybe it's going to be a pretty different year for us. Like I think our risk, I mean, might have possibly increased just because of the way South Carolina is turning in the state house, and people feel really like really impassioned. And abortion bans come up every year. So
Rooting for you, Courtney. Awesome. Mariceli, I see you're gonna hop on this coach tool. I just found Coach like last week. Did you click into it? It just like, it's the sweetest thing. Like it holds your hand through every single piece. It's like,
what I need.
okay, go through Facebook security settings now. Did you do it? Great job. Okay, check out Twitter now. Did you do it? Good job.
It's nice when the website congratulates you, gives you those little carrots to keep doing the work.
I need that validation.
Totally.
Are there other things that folks would like to talk about, or things that you'd like to start doing in real time that we could offer support on? I'm so glad that this has felt accessible and doable. That was our hope, that we would take this from the world of overwhelm to the world of concrete things that you can actually do that are useful. So I'm really glad to know that that has landed well with people.
I do have a general question about the data brokers you were talking about earlier. Can your information, so like once you go through the process of unsubscribing, can your information pop back up? So, and if so, how often should you go back in to check to see if your information is there?
That is such a good question. It can definitely pop back up because you'll like buy something else online and like use your phone number or like shipping address or whatever again. And so it'll just get sold to somebody again. In terms of how long it takes for something to go from like your action to being on a data broker, it's likely like a couple of months, I think. Olivia, do you know? Okay, I did this like weird like hacky like research project with some friends one time where we like made all these like fake personas and we tried to like sign up for CVS cards with them and see how long it would take before they showed up on data brokers. But they didn't get added on data brokers, so we like messed up somewhere along there. But I would suggest checking it out probably like annually. But more than that, there are actually like some strategies that you can employ so that they don't get like your right information in data brokers anymore, or so that you are like obfuscating like your real information with like a bunch of fake information. So like whenever something asks online for me for my phone number, I've made like a Google Voice number that's attached to like my secondary email address, and that's the number that I put in. And I have Google Voice on my phone, so like if I need like to actually, if somebody's actually going to like call or confirm anything through that number, I can confirm it. And some people will get like PO boxes for like extra security. Like if you're like actually worried about people showing up at your house, it's like a good idea to think about. And there are a lot of other strategies for kind of like how you can not be using the information that's like closest to your heart and your identity, to be like operating online.
Yeah, I have a couple of different like kind of throwaway emails that I like always use that to subscribe to any kind of like newsletters or signing up for, CVS cards, that kind of thing. The other thing that is important to note, and we discovered this pretty recently with a housemate of mine, who is relatively new living here, but voting records also can get pulled, and that's often how your address can appear in those things. And so if you were to move and be re-registering to vote, that would probably then be a good time to look again in those data brokers and maybe opt out again. The other thing is, like, I often give variations of my name, and that sometimes can really screw with them as well, which is great, particularly when you have a very unique name like I do. If there aren't any other questions, we probably can hop off early, give everybody a chance to rest, get eyes away from the screen a little bit.
Thank you all so much for coming and for the really sweet feedback in the chat. It's really true. It's like if this stuff isn't accessible, then you're not actually going to do it. You're just going to like feel overwhelmed by it. And so it's like not even worth doing. So just tell your friends, share on the information, get a buddy to be your digital security buddy, and like actually make you get a password manager and like actually set it up. Yeah, rooting for all of you.
Yeah, totally. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming and for the sweet feedback and questions and interaction and stuff. It's really lovely.
Thank y'all. This has been
Thank you.
super